Welcome to the SEI Podcast series, a production of Carnegie Mellon University's Software Engineering Institute. The SEI is a federally funded research and development center sponsored by the U.S. Department of Defense and operated by Carnegie Mellon University. A transcript of today's podcast will be available on the SEI website at sei.cmu.edu/podcasts. My name is Eileen Rubel, and I lead the SEI's Continuous Lifecycle Solutions Initiative team. With me today is my colleague, Suzanne Miller. Today's podcast is a part of our new series on the careers of women in software and cybersecurity. Susie is typically on the other side of the table for these podcasts, but today we're going to get to learn all about her story. Hi, Susie.
Hello.
Thank you for joining me today.
It is different being on the other side, but I'll do my best.
And we've had the good fortune, I think, of working together really closely for the last several years. So I'm looking forward to an opportunity for our viewers and listeners to learn a little bit about you, and maybe I'll learn some new things too.
Who knows?
So one of the things that you and I have in common is that we both grew up as what you'd call military brats. Both moved around a lot due to fathers in the Air Force, stationed across Europe and in other parts of the world. So I'm wondering if you can tell me a little bit about your childhood. Did you have visions of winding up in computer science or engineering as a kid?
No. I mean, seriously, I didn't. I was oldest of 6 children. In my family, I was known as second mother in command because my dad was in the Air Force, but my mother was also in the Air Force. And they married after she got out of the Air Force, so, we had very, very military family. And the traditions, were much more towards the teacher, nurse, that kind of a thing. But I also had a father who basically said, I don't care what you're doing, do it well. So if you're in math class, do it well. If you're in English class, do it well. Do not, mess up your grammar. I mean, he was basically everything you do, you should do well. But he wasn't judgmental about what that should be. And so it wasn't really until we got closer to, when I was going to be going to college that I really saw that he had a preference for me to go into tech industries. And his last assignment in the Air Force before he retired, and my last year in high school, we were stationed over in Belgium. And he was with the NATO division, he was with NIXMA. And I went to this very small Department of Defense school. And one of the things about the school was I had already gone through all the math in various places I'd been, so I didn't actually have any math the year that I was a senior, and I was choosing universities and all the rest of the thing. I didn't think anything of this. There was a physics class. I took the physics class, so I wasn't completely out of things. All right, fine. So I did actually go to UC Santa Barbara, and I started out in their computer science department. And I did suffer for the lack of a year of math, but I got through that. And at the end of that first year, I was bored silly. Now, I'm a little older than you are, and so I had to deal with punch cards. And, computer science, that meant 4-hour turnaround, sit around the computer center, wait for the stuff to come back. If you made a typo, which thankfully my mother made us all learn how to type, so I actually didn't get typos very often. But whatever error you made, now you've got this turnaround again. And I had to do a bio, kind of thing. And so for a bio class, I took human physiology. And my reaction to that was, this is so much more complex than this engineering stuff. I don't want to do engineering. I want to do medicine. I want to do genetics. I want to do something that's going to let me deal with this biological systems. And I pursued that. I pursued a lot of education for that and found that there's this intersection. I mean, a lot of the stuff that I'd learned in the computer science that I had done, fed into that. And at that school at that time, they were just starting a degree in human factors engineering. And it was a multidisciplinary kind of thing. So it was perceptual motor learning and psychology and environmental physiology and mechanical engineering and computer science. And so that actually ended up being the thing for me. That's what I pursued. Had no idea whatsoever what I was going to do with it when I got out. But I just knew that I couldn't just do the traditional engineering. And I wanted to do something that got me into this other space where I'm dealing with biological systems, ecosystems, and I talk about ecosystems all the time. So that's where that came from. So the thing that I got out of moving around and doing all that is I was flexible, right? It didn't bother me that there wasn't a math class. I knew that there would be something else and that I would figure it out. And I think that was a gift that my dad didn't even know he was giving me by moving me around all these places. But it's one that's sort of stuck with me, I think.
So your career also took you to some pretty interesting places.
But a few places, yeah.
Can you talk about any, particularly defining moments in your career that really set you on the trajectory that I know you on today?
So probably the first one was when I went for an interview at Lockheed Missile and Space up in Sunnyvale. And there's a guy named Bob Bowles was the guy who interviewed me. And he was interviewing me for a job writing code. So I just had this lovely, bachelor's degree that I'd finished in human factors engineering. And he saw on my very short resume at the time that I had done Fortran, and he wanted a Fortran programmer. And I'm like, I don't have a CS degree. Why do you want a Fortran programmer? Why do you want me for this job? And he says, I don't care that you don't have a CS degree. You've done enough language that I know you can learn another language. He says, what I looked at is I was what's called a Regent Scholar, which is a UC, University of California thing. And he says, I know if you're a Regent Scholar that you will try to do your best at whatever I do and that you will probably succeed. So I don't really care that isn't what you were trained in. I will train you. And he did. And I learned all kinds of languages and did all kinds of things at Lockheed. But he was the first one that really got me into thinking about it's not what you knew, it's what you can learn. In many of our settings, it's really important. And so he was a mentor in that sense of really and helped me to navigate being young female in an engineering role. In my first job, there were we were in field operations for one of the missile programs, and it was all retired military guys, Navy, Army, Air Force, and I knew the culture, but I had never dealt with that culture as an adult. So he was also very helpful in helping me to navigate how do I deal with this kind of a culture. So it was that was probably one of the real defining moments of I can do anything, even if I don't know how to do it. And he really helped me through that.
You know how important mentoring is to me.
Yes, I do.
Are there any other, mentorship lessons, if you will, or things that you really took away from other professional mentoring relationships or personal mentoring relationships that you'd like to share?
So one of them is kind of, it doesn't sound like a pleasant lesson, but it was a very telling lesson. I got my master's degree while I was at Lockheed, and I got a job in the department that I'd been in, but I got a job at the director's level as the technology consultant for that directorate. And I was like, great, we're going to bring in new technologies and all these kinds of infrastructure things, and that's all wonderful. And there was this guy that was one of the directors that worked for the higher level director, and every time he and I disagreed about a technology choice, he won. And you know me well enough to know that I don't sit on that for very long.
Right.
So I went to my boss after about 3 of these and I said, okay, you hired me to be your technology consultant, but every time I give an opinion and it varies with this other guy's opinion, he's the one who wins. What's going on here? And he sat back and he was very thoughtful about it. I mean, he wasn't just, just dismissive at all. And he said, I don't know, I have to think about that. So he thought about it, came back, and he says, you know what? You need to leave. And I said, excuse me? He says, no. He says, I realized that when I first met you, you were in charge of the overhead budgeting. See, this is why I don't do money. The overhead budgeting for this department, and you did a great job at it for 2 years, and I still see you that way. I have not, you are not the technology consultant person that has all this great education, which I encouraged you to do, and I love what you do. But he says, my fault, I cannot see past that.
He couldn't get out of the mental model of you being in that
the
specific
young
role.
Person in that role.
Which is often why young people need to leave a company or go to
And he
another
says,
team.
you know, I will help you find a job somewhere. And I didn't leave the company. He says, help you find a job somewhere else, but you need to find a job somewhere else. He says, you may come back to us someday, but I need some space to be able to see you differently. And so I've said, and I can't even tell you how many people I've said that to, that, you know, if you get some extra education, build some extra skills, you can't always stay where you were and be and have the opportunity to use those skills and to grow more. And that was a really hard lesson. I mean, I loved the people I worked with. I really didn't want to leave that job, but it's actually what led me here. Leaving that job is what led me here. Because the next job that I had, it was over in the space system divisions, where I worked with the guy who started the software quality engineering department at Lockheed, and that sort of got me into all the things that in the CMM stuff and everything that I worked with at the SEI. So he actually changed, he doesn't know it, but he changed my whole career path by kicking me out.
Well, that's an important lesson to learn, is that sometimes you can only make the best use of your skills in another opportunity because of things that you can't control.
Right.
So.
And the thing that, I'll go back to the flexibility part. Because I moved around a lot, I knew I could. I mean, and that's the thing I see with some of the younger people, if they've never done anything else and they've lived in one place, and a lot of people, grow up in one place, get educated and stay. And that's great. I mean, there's a lot of things I miss because I don't have that background. But
I understand.
I have the background of being able to know that the next place may not be better, probably won't be worse, it'll be different, and that's okay. And that's a lesson that's hard to teach someone who's never had early experience of being sort of bounced around and surviving.
Right, it's a different perspective on the risk of moving along from something that you're comfortable with. Because we didn't grow up getting too comfortable anywhere.
Not really. I mean, my longest was 4 years. I don't know what yours was.
5.
Oh, beat me by 1.
But I did have a friend whose mother once said she knew they would get orders when she found the blender.
Ah!
When she finally found the blender after their last move, they would get orders that week.
Yep, I hear you.
So let's move forward to the present day, since you talked about how that set you on the path to the SEI. I know all about what you do at the SEI, but why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners a little bit about what's typical for you? And I know you're going to laugh at that because nothing's typical. You travel a lot. You do a lot of different kinds of work with our clients. Can you talk a little bit about all of that?
So I went to this workshop one time where it's personal visioning and all this kind of stuff, and they try to get you to figure out sort of what are you, how do you define yourself? And I actually came up with something that I do hang on to inside that I think lays over everything, is I'm a cartographer. I'm a mapper.
You are.
I create maps. I create organizational roadmaps. I create physical maps. I create maps of ways you can navigate a certain topic. And that's what the CMMs was, the capability maturity models. It was a map of how you can improve practices. Didn't always get used that way, but that was kind of always my vision of it. So everything I've done here, you can see that in what I do. And as long as I'm helping illuminate some topic by giving you maps, I'm a happy girl. And that means that, I go out to customers, I help them build maps, and what I learn from them I bring back and sometimes can build the map that's sort of the more general map. And sometimes it's going out and researching a topic in a more traditional way to build a different kind of map. And that's kind of, that speaks to my whole, doesn't matter what the technology was, I'm creating maps about it. And so that's what guides everything.
I had never thought about it that way, but as soon as you said cartographer, it completely made sense.
I'm a 21st century cartographer.
And we're very grateful that you are.
But it's not something you can really, you don't go in and tell a customer, hi, you just hired a cartographer, aren't you happy?
Here's our senior cartographer.
But the problem solving that comes along with that. I mean, we've talked about how puzzles, are something that we both appreciate, and that's and that goes back to that intersection of technology, ecosystems, human systems, the more complex puzzles are the ones that involve how technology affects an organizational space, not just an actual mission, an individual mission. It's how it affects everything. And that's where we need maps. So that's what I do.
Well, speaking of maps, see where I'm going to go. Speaking of maps, I'd like to follow the highway a little bit north of Pittsburgh and talk about, let's go outside of work and talk about things that you like to do outside of work. I know that every year you go to the Pesek War up in Slippery Rock.
That's right.
And I would love to tell people a little bit more about that and about how that informs how you, how you see the world and how you relate to the people around you.
So, yes. So one of the things, the Pesek War is an event that is sponsored by a group called the Society for Creative Anachronism. And it focuses on, it's not really reenactment per se, but it's medieval style living for 2 weeks in a camping setting. And we do take sanitation seriously. There are some things, that's where the creative part comes in. We don't, we're not trying to do
You're not purists
century. We're
about
not
15th century?
No, not when it comes to sanitation, so just to be clear. But it's so completely different than what I do that it helps to give me distance, and that distance helps me to come back with different ideas. I've been doing it for 25 years, and so it's something that I look forward to. I mean, and it's crazy stuff because you're camping in the heat of Pennsylvania August, no air conditioning, cooking over, we do use a camp stove. My back can't cook over a fire anymore. Living in a tent until I spent some money to build a gypsy wagon of my own, so I don't actually have to put up a tent anymore. But it's a completely different setting. And pulling away from the technology, I do have, just because my dad is old now and need to be reachable, I do have a cell phone, but like the computer stays at home. It's not a place where technology intrudes very much. And so that is a way that I deal with all the kind of overload of everything else is by sort of having that planned escape. And I have only violated it once. There was one year that there was an event that was happening the first week, and I went to the event and then only did the second week. And I was so cranky when I came back that everybody says, we will never try and keep you from Pesek again, because I just didn't get enough of that distance. So some people, and that's the thing I'll say about being involved in tech, you've got to find your balance, your own balance. Right. If you don't have something outside of that, it will consume you in many cases, and that's not good either. So we have to. My balance is a little more extreme than some people's, but that's what I do every 2 weeks. And I actually, on my away message, I have something that says, other people leave the country for their vacation, I leave the century. And I actually had somebody from outside the U.S. one time that I was talking to, on some research topic, that sent me a message afterwards and said, what did that mean? You leave the century? Because he had no context for any of these kinds of reenactment activities. So that was kind of funny. I had to explain it to him.
I think that's so important. It's so easy in this day and age, right? We have laptops, we have cell phones, and so the office isn't the office. The office is where you are. Right. And it's so easy to get sucked into, I got a text message, I should deal with that now, or I'll just spend 5 minutes reading my email, and the next thing you know, your work has become all consuming. Right. And so consciously making that break for your own health and enjoyment and exploration of your hobby and self-actualization, I think.
It also does one other thing, is it helps me to know where there are gaps in my mentoring of others. Because if I do get, my other colleagues know, if you call me, I will answer, and if it's really an emergency, I'll deal with it. But the more of those calls I get, the more I know that I'm not giving you the tools that you need to do the work that we're doing together. And so I have to take some responsibility when I get back, to make sure that I transfer some of that knowledge that I didn't know was sitting in my head and get it out onto a real map instead of just the map in my head.
Something I heard once that always stuck with me is that in your job, you want to strive for the balance between being indispensable but not so indispensable that you can't be out of the room, or you can't leave the office. And so
I call it the single point failure syndrome.
Right.
And I learned the hard way early in my career that being a single point failure makes you very popular, but it makes you not be able to have a life. And so I try not to go there. I don't always succeed, but I try not to.
And we strive for that kind of balance on our team.
Yeah, we do.
So we talked a little bit about the deluge of things around us. How do you keep up, though, with the areas that you're interested in terms of work? What do you read? Do you listen to podcasts? What do you tell other people like me? What do you tell us to go to?
So I'm kind of old school. I haven't gotten into the podcast thing yet. I always find it amusing. You know, it's like, well, you can get these podcasts everywhere, and I just don't. I don't do that. And I just got my first Audible subscription. And so, you know, I'm trying to move into that, but I'm so reading centric that, you know, I got a Paperwhite Kindle before I got an Audible subscription, right? That was the more important thing for me to get. And so there's, I think, 3 sources for me that I go to a lot. One is family. I'm one of 6, and all 6 of us are in tech.
Right.
I got a cybersecurity guy, I got a software development manager guy, I've got, you know, I've got all over the place. And so when we get together for family events and just, you know, when we're talking on the phone and whatnot, somebody will share something that they're reading, and it's like, oh, what was good about that? And my father's 89 years old, and he still reads techie stuff. And I gave him Dan Pink's Drive. You know, he read Drive. And then he read the next one. He said, well, I didn't like that one. But he still stays active in contemporary stuff to read. And so sometimes I get stuff from him. So family is a big source. I do the same thing you do. I listen to what my colleagues are talking about. And, you know, I let them filter some stuff for me. Oh, I read this book. Oh, I didn't like that book. But, you know, try this one. And that's, you know, but I also actually, one of the things that I am not religious about, but when I'm feeling like my list has gotten too small, or I don't like things that are already on my list, because I do keep a list, is LinkedIn.
Yeah.
I just go to LinkedIn and I just, you know, Google, I've got 3 or 4 groups that I'm a part of, and go see what people are. Sometimes I'll even say, hey, has anybody read anything good lately about X? And so I'll do that. But I am not as systematic as sometimes I think I should be. When I really get into reading stuff, though, is there's this particular kind of strategic planning workshop that I do, and it requires that you kind of have a whole bunch of really broad kinds of information about different topics. And that's when I'll do kind of a search, and then that search really makes my list long.
Right.
So then I have to work it off. You know, so those are some ways that I do it, but I'm a list person, and so, you know, the list grows and gets reprioritized and fed off of, but it's still mostly reading. I'm not a podcast girl yet, so maybe I will be in the next couple of years. We'll see.
Despite all of the podcasts that you record,
I know,
you're not quite consuming that yet.
No, I'm not. I can't. No, I'm trying to get modern, but you know.
Not quite the barefoot cobbler.
No, not quite. No, I do have sandals at least.
So if you could give, well, I won't even limit you to one piece of advice, but talking to somebody that's looking to enter computer science, a STEM, and an engineering career, what advice would you give to somebody young and just starting out? So
one thing is this idea that tech is a part of everything. So, you know, if you get like I did, I got just desperately interested in human physiology and human biological systems. Don't say, well, if I do that, I can't do tech. You know,
right.
It's everywhere, and you may find it. You know, you may become a bioengineer and make the next, you know, bionic man. I mean, you don't know where it's going to lead. If you don't love what you're learning, it's really hard to be good at it. And so whatever it is that makes you feel like it's worth staying up until 2 a.m. to finish that book, that's the thing that is probably the thing that's going to drive you. And if you end up where tech is a secondary aspect of your life and not the primary one, so what? But if you are driven by the passion of the technology, like I have one brother that he looks at a piece of machinery and all he can think about is how to take it apart and put it back together better. I don't have that, but he does. That's his passion, you know. So find that passion and learn what you need to learn. And if the people that are teaching you, trying to teach you what you need to learn, if it's not working for you, find somebody else to learn from. We have so many sources of learning, you know, that are, some of them are interactive, some of them you just go out and find out on the internet. I am amazed at the things that we have access to today, and you know, use all channels. I guess that's the thing, is use all channels to learn what you need to learn, and don't let anybody tell you that just because you didn't get an A in their class that they're not capable. That's just hooey. That's the nicest thing I can say about it.
On that note, thank you so much for sitting down with me today. I've enjoyed working with you for the last few years. I won't say how many. And you do so many of these podcasts, and it's really been fun to A, get to know even more about you, but B, you know, share about you to our viewers and listeners.
Thank you.
So this podcast is available pretty much anywhere you get your podcasts, SoundCloud, Stitcher, iTunes, iHeartRadio. It's also on the SEI website at sei.cmu.edu/podcasts and our YouTube channel. As always, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to email us at info@sei.cmu.edu. Thank you.